I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today's episode is a rapid reaction alert regarding a new zero-day vulnerability causing cyber issues for users of Ivanti's Connect Secure product, or previously known as the Pulse Security VPN. As listeners of the podcast know, we try to keep rapid reaction episodes to about 10 minutes or less to give you what you need to know in a very quick period of time. So today I'm really excited to be joined by Charles Carmakal, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Mandiant. I think many of our listeners have worked with Mandiant in the past, but Mandiant is one of the leading IR firms in the world with whom we've partnered hundreds of times to guide clients through cyber crises and preparedness. Through this work, Mandiant and Charles have their finger on the pulse of vulnerabilities that may be targeted for exploitation by threat actors around the world. And we're so happy to have their expertise, not only for the day-to-day work that we do with clients, but also bringing that expertise to listeners of the podcast. Charles, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
So Charles, maybe you can just give us a sense of what's happening. Who is Ivanti and what product is creating concern in the cyber community?
Yeah, so Ivanti is a technology product company. It makes a lot of different products, but the product that we're most concerned about right now is a product called Pulse Secure VPN, or Ivanti Secure Connect. And it's essentially a VPN solution that lots of organizations across the globe use to remotely access their internal network. So employees or contractors will leverage this technology to get access to remote networks. And what we're dealing with right now is a situation where last week, Ivanti had published that they learned about a zero-day vulnerability, specifically two different vulnerabilities in the product that have been exploited in a limited capacity by a threat actor. And so they've communicated mitigations to organizations to help them stop the ability for a threat actor to exploit the vulnerability while Ivanti works on a patch to push out for organizations to download and implement a permanent fix. But we have seen exploitation in the wild by at least one threat actor so far, and we're anticipating that other threat actors will learn how to exploit this.
A number of questions on this, but maybe just kind of starting basics. I think a number of our listeners will be familiar with zero-day vulnerabilities and how those appear and why they create a specific concern. But for those who are just coming to the cybersecurity world, what is a zero-day vulnerability and why is it so concerning?
Yeah, a zero-day vulnerability is essentially a vulnerability that's known by somebody before the vendor knows about it and before a patch is available. So in this situation, a threat actor discovered a security or series of security vulnerabilities in the Ivanti Pulse Secure product, exploited it at some number of organizations, and then Ivanti created a mitigation afterwards and provided those mitigations and will eventually provide a patch to organizations. And so the concern about zero-day vulnerabilities is that organizations that use technology products that are vulnerable to this could have been exploited before they had the ability to apply a patch.
Yeah, and that goes true for not only the vendors who are offering the technology, but also for the users. So users are using a product as it's designed and now it's intended, but have no idea that data that may be passing through that technology may be subject to that vulnerability and being exploited and compromised through the use of that technology. So this is a VPN product, as I understand it. And how are we seeing the vulnerability present in the types of ways that the vulnerability is being exploited by threat actors?
Yeah. So the vulnerability is being exploited by threat actors essentially sending commands to a VPN server. And those VPN servers are run by organizations across the globe. And the exploitation itself allows the attacker to get privileged access to the device where they could write files to the file system. They could deploy backdoors on it. They could deploy backdoors that allow the threat actor to capture credentials of users that are legitimately logging into the device. And those credentials that are stolen or accessed by the threat actor can be used to access resources that are protected with those usernames and passwords.
So Charles, is it the case then that this vulnerability would give the ability for threat actors to compromise specific users' accounts who would have been authorized users of this VPN product, and then allows the threat actor to gain access to all of the files and all of the data and all of the resources that that user would have been able to access in the ordinary course.
So what we know is we are seeing the threat actor deploying malware that allows them to capture credentials that are provided by legitimate users that are authenticating to the VPN. And in some situations, we're able to see that the attacker is capturing some additional data that potentially could be used to allow the attacker to authenticate to the VPN appliance and then access the internal network. We're still a little bit early in our investigation, and we're trying to figure out the exact impact to this. And what's important to note is that most organizations, when they deploy VPN solutions, they require multi-factor authentication. And what we're trying to assess right now is whether or not the threat actor stole enough data to be able to authenticate to a VPN with multi-factor authentication, which we don't know the answer to yet, but we do know that they have stolen credentials. Those credentials could allow access to other resources that don't require multi-factor authentication. And in some situations, we've seen a backdoor deployed on a VPN appliance that essentially allows the attacker to proxy onto the internal network of a victim organization. And once they have that internal network access, they could then access resources using those stolen credentials.
Has this played out in the form of ransomware thus far, or are we seeing other types of motivations for this attack?
Yeah, right now, the motivation appears to be espionage focused. So far, we know of at least one threat actor that's been exploiting this vulnerability since early December 2023. We anticipate at some point in time, probably in the coming days or weeks, other threat actors are going to learn how to exploit this vulnerability. And perhaps they could be educated by the security community. Maybe it's an offensive security researcher that develops a proof of concept code and publishes on the internet. But at some point in time, we're pretty sure that other threat actors will learn how to exploit this and will start mass exploiting it. And so that's why we're really encouraging organizations to deploy the mitigations as quickly as possible and start to plan for and anticipate the formal patch that'll be released in a staggering way starting on January 22nd.
Right. So we don't yet have a patch, but it sounds like there is steps to take now, including to understand to what extent this vulnerability may have been exploited within an organization's environment, and then mitigating steps around the ongoing use of it. From your perspective, is there some immediate do nows that Mandiant's recommending?
Yeah. So the most immediate thing to do is apply the mitigation. The second thing that's really important to do that's different for this vulnerability than the majority of other vulnerabilities out there is Ivanti has provided a tool called an integrity checker tool, which essentially allows organizations to determine whether or not their device has already been compromised. And there's two versions of this tool. One is already built into the product, and it'll run on an automated basis. So you can log into the Pulse VPN product as an administrator and determine whether or not the integrity checker tool found any file mismatches. And a file mismatch may be a high likely indicator that the device was compromised and that malicious software was deployed on it. In addition to the internal built integrity checker tool, there's an additional integrity checker tool that you could download from the Ivanti website and run it on an appliance. And that external integrity checker tool will do more of a thorough analysis of a system to determine if it's been compromised. The one downside of running this external integrity checker tool is it does require that the device is rebooted, so you lose some data, but there's a whole lot of value in running this just to do a deep scrub of the device. And so I'm happy that Ivanti provided this tooling to organizations to help them assess whether or not their device is compromised.
Yeah. And then what does that mean for users who maybe they run the tools and come back clean or no indicators of compromise, but yet you do not have a patch product? Are we recommending, or is Mandiant recommending, to discontinue or use in a modified state? How has that been playing out thus far?
Yeah, so far, based on our testing, the mitigations work effectively and as intended. So for organizations that have deployed the mitigations, it's our expectation that it's working, and we haven't seen any successful exploitation of devices that have implemented the mitigations. As it relates to organizations that have run the integrity checker tool and are seeing file mismatches, at that point in time, there's a very decent chance, a very high likely chance that the device is compromised. And at that point in time, we'd recommend organizations create a support ticket, send it over to Ivanti, have them take a look at the ICT or the integrity checker tool output, and they will do a quick triage and determine if the device is compromised. And if the device is compromised, they'll provide a forensic image to the organization to allow them to do a forensic analysis, which will aid in their overall investigation.
Yes, and that's the part where you and your team have been great partners to at least Hogan and our clients doing that forensics review. But in the meantime, we very much appreciate your bringing this knowledge and expertise to the community, try to get out ahead of some of this malicious behavior, and so that more of that information can help organizations prepare and prevent from these bad consequences from happening.
Absolutely.
Well, Charles, thanks again for joining the podcast. Looking forward to having you back on future episodes. But this has been really great to understand how this vulnerability is playing out and what zero-day vulnerabilities mean for cyber professionals. With that, I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and those are your data points.